This lecture is on reflective practice, and we will start off by looking at what is reflective practice before we discuss why it's worth doing. Now, there are many different definitions of reflective practice, and a lot of them sort of coalesce around the same sort of few issues. I really like the Department of Education and Training in the Victorian government's definition because I think it captures, the key points of reflective practice. The first being that it's a bottom-up, self-directed process of learning. And what that is trying to say, in terms of it being a bottom-up, is that you don't have to wait for authority figure or an expert or someone to whom you've given the power to direct your learning. It is something you can pretty much take control of yourself. So that's the point of bottom-up. And with self-directed, it sort of builds on that idea and talks about having a sense of autonomy and agency in what it is that you're going to learn. And I think as we move on into the knowledge economy more aggressively and deeper, the more important it will be to become a lifelong learner and someone who can take initiative, take agency, take control of their learning and be able to self-direct it will be someone who will be able to exploit the potentials in the new economy. So the bottom-up self-directed process of learning can be formal or informal in its approach, individual or collaborative in its nature. So you can do it by yourself, you can do it in a group, you can do it as part of a formalized curriculum in a class or a course, or you can do it in self-learning, just something that you're interested in, maybe a hobby or something. Characteristics of reflective practice include it be approached in a conscious, planned, and systematic manner. And I think that is something that I find we miss a lot when we talk about reflective practice. We think reflective practice is, when I say we, I mean, us. Anyway, I think we tend to think of reflective practice as sitting down and almost just meditating on yourself and trying to understand that. It's almost got that sort of old school confessional approach to it. And I think, that they couldn't be further from the truth. Reflective practice has to be done in a conscious manner, in a deliberate manner. There are ways you go about doing it. It allows you to plan. And there are systems you can use to make sure that you build on your learning. So let's start by talking about what is reflective practice. Yeah? So reflection is a form of response of the learner to their learning experience. So when something happens to you as a learner, be it in a classroom or otherwise, reflective practice is actually what happens when you walk away from that activity and you think about what's happening. It's actually your response to what happened in the classroom that helps you understand what you've learned. And that is really what reflection is like. Another really useful definition is it is a conscious activity in which we engage to explore our experiences and develop new understandings and conceptualizations. This is a deliberate conscious activity where we look at, well, what did we do, what happened to us, and how can we use what we did and what happened to us to develop new ways of understanding, new ideas, new ways of seeing the world, and so on. So that is what reflective practice is. So why should we engage in reflective practice? So Gibbs says to us, it is not sufficient simply to have an experience in order to learn. Without reflecting upon this experience, it may be quickly forgotten or its learning potential lost. It is from the feelings and thoughts emerging from this reflection that generalizations or concepts can be generated, and it is generalizations that allow new situations to be tackled effectively. So there's quite a bit in there, so let's try unpacking it bit by bit. Gibbs is saying something that we've spoken about in class, that it's not enough just to do the activities that are given to you in the classroom and go, well, I've done my activities for the day and hence I've learned certain things. Which is why at the end of the class we always do well, let's reflect on what we've learned. What do I know today that I didn't know yesterday? And that's always a question we go to when we talk about reflection. And is this reflection that helps us really embed what we learned, what happened in the classroom, so that we don't forget it. And when we do the recaps the next week or the next lesson, we can build upon that to make sure that we are not losing the potential there. And, one of the things that we have spoken about also is that you don't want to just talk about what you did. This happened and that happened and then this person did that. But we really also want to talk about the feelings and the thoughts. And, sometimes I understand people get a bit, let's just say, they feel a bit disdainful about the discussion of how I feel or how this classroom activity made me feel. But it's through these feelings and thoughts that we can truly come to understand what did we learn. And the anxiety around learning is a learning realization, because you then have to manage that anxiety in order to move on to learning some of the other things. And it's these reflections that will then give you an idea of some kind of conceptual spaces, or statements or hypotheses that you can test further and find out, well, is this doable? The other reason that we do reflective practice every week, and I've spoken about this to you in the classroom, is Gibbs say it allows new situations to be tackled effectively. In the way I tend to articulate in this class is when I talk about our obsessions with outcomes to the expense of process. When you make an outcome, you have arrived at the end point, and you get then judged on the end point. But the challenge for us is not actually finishing the project. The challenge is to be able to repeat the project. And the more aware you are of your process, the faster you can then do it in the future and continue to develop more skills and make sure your projects are finished better. And reflection is a key point of developing that understanding. Now, Dewey talks about, while we cannot learn or be taught to think, we do have to learn how to think well, especially acquire the general habit of reflecting. And that is something that is fairly important. Being able to reflect, considering all the scenarios, considering all the potentials, understanding why you did what you did, understanding why what happened, and then coming up with a reaction to that, a response to that, means that in the future you will be able to do things better, or at least consciously, if not test some new solutions. And later in the lecture we'll talk about that iterative process. Why reflective practice? Well, it is through the development of knowledge and the understanding of the practice setting, and the ability to recognize and respond to such knowledge, that the reflective practitioner truly becomes responsive to the needs, concerns that are so important in shaping practice. Alright, that seems like a mouthful, so let's unpack that again. It is through the development of knowledge and understanding of the practice, that means through the development of the knowledge and understanding of what it is that you do as media and comm practitioners, in our case, and the ability to recognize and respond. Well, alright, this is what I know that I'm doing. This is how I recognize the things that I'm doing. This is how I respond to all the things that are going on. This means that when circumstances change, needs, issues, concerns change, all those allow you to react in a way, and that helps hone your skills as a practitioner. If you look at something like sports as a good analogy, the what separates the highest performers from the not so high performers is not always the issues of skill. It's actually a response to a situation. How a player under pressure responds to a situation. How do they know how to respond? It's through doing things like reflective practice, understanding this is what I did, this is what happened, automating a lot of those processes as far as possible, allowing you to concentrate on continuing to develop higher order skill sets. Reflection helps you become more active and aware in the learning process, focusing not only on what you have learned, but also how you have learned it. And that is one of the most powerful parts of engaging in reflection. Being a reflective practitioner is not just about I know this now and I know this now, but it's about how do I best acquire this skill or knowledge. And when you engage in reflective practice, over time you have a stronger understanding of your own aptitude to particular activities, particular forms of uh, practice or learning, and you can then skew your learning activities to maximize uh, your sort of preferred style of learning. And I think that is something that is a problem at the end of the day in any massification situation. When you're in a classroom with 20, 30, 60, 120, 300 people, and given the history of education as a mass industry, things tend to get done in what works for most people, which might not work for the certain students. And for yourself, as a who wants to be a lifelong learner, it's very important to understand. Well, this is how I learn. This is how I learn best. So you don't waste time when you have to learn a new skill, a new knowledge, trying to ape what is supposed to be the best way to teach, but you actually focus on what is the best way that you learn. So you can shift the focus here from the teacher to the learner. I think that's one of the more powerful things about reflective practice. So where does learning happen? Now we tend to think of learning as being fairly linear. If you come into a classroom, things are designed for you. Today you do this set of activities, tomorrow or the next week you do this, and so on and so forth. And over time you accumulate a certain amount of skills and knowledges. So we tend to think as learning as being accumulative, linear, continuous, contained, in the set that if I'm doing this particular course, the information that I need to learn is within this course and lives in this little box. And more we realize, more and more that we would have realized that no, actually there's a lot of connections between all the different things you're learning. And when we talk about T-shaped people, you're looking at connections between possibly even separate fields or fields that aren't traditionally put in the same box to be studied. And that is an important part of what the problem with learning is. And finally, we think learning has to be directed. There has to be someone out there who's designed a curriculum for us that we can engage in. So I'm telling you that that's where learning does not happen. Learning is not accumulative, is not linear, continuous, contained, or directed. But where learning happens is actually in the going backwards, the reflective practice. So if you look at this diagram, I think it's a really useful diagram. So it looks at the overall iterative learning experience on a linear timescale. But the learning only happens, the aha moment only happens when you've done the set of activities and you go back towards them and spend some time thinking about, well, what did I do there? What were the challenges of what I did? What did I do well? What didn't I do well? What linked back to other things I know? All this thinking about your activities, linking back to your reflections, eventually what tends to happen is you have this aha moment where you go, oh, I know what I've learned. This is how I can use it in the future. It doesn't have to obviously be that dramatic. Sometimes it's quite undramatic. But that is really where the learning happens. It doesn't happen in that linear, cumulative, continuous way, but it actually happens in discontinuities where you stop to go back and look at what's going on. It doesn't have to be linear. It can be fairly, where there's different lines, network models, and so on. Information is coming from all different places, and and ideally a reflective practitioner would be including all the things that they're experiencing in developing themselves as a practitioner, whether it be media and com or otherwise. So it would be all part of one larger whole. When using reflective practices, people learn to become aware of how they know what they know, but also what they have learned. And this is something that we spoke about earlier, but I think it's worth making the point. The how they know is a really key one. So that when you go into the workspace and you're given a challenge or asked to undertake an activity that you haven't undertaken before, if you know what the best way you learn is, you can go and design a learning experience for yourself, and that is the most efficient and the most interesting to you. The process of reflective practice allows us to look systematically and rigorously at our own practices as an appropriate means for self-analytical growth. When reflective practice is not just about your practice as your discipline or as a media and com practitioner, but rather reflective practice should eventually extend out into you as a human being, you as a member of a family, member of a community, member of a working team, with your family, with your friends, with your siblings, with your loved ones, and so on. And it gives you a stronger sense of where you are, and that helps you link to understanding what motivates your practices. So it's a much larger idea than just focused on just that one course at the moment, but that's a more of a long-term thing. The process of reflection requires a person to be both critical of knowledge and creative in ideas. And this is something that you will find as you go along on your path to become a reflective practitioner. You end up having to acquire, or end up needing to acquire a whole bunch of new forms of thinking, but it also makes you start ask yourself the reliability and the veracity of the things that you know. And once you arrive at a stage where you're questioning the veracity of what you know, you also then start understanding how you can tie things up together to be very creative in the way you solve a problem. Again, this is the long-term intentions of a reflective practitioner. Finally, reflection is itself a tool to mediate learning as a learning process in itself. What I'm trying to say here is that reflective practice is in itself a tool to facilitate learning of being a reflective practitioner. So the more reflective practice you engage in and the more consistently you do it, the better you get at it, the more you get out of it. So if you're only doing reflective practice for coursework purposes, once a semester or once a week or whatever, in the long run you're not going to get the maximum benefits of a reflective practitioner. Reflective practice itself is a skill that needs to be developed, and the only way to develop reflective practice is to do more of it. So one of the things I just want to quickly talk about is the where in our learning process we can use reflective practice. And this is also a cycle that you can use in any work sort of environment. This is Klopp's learning process, and you can jump in at any point of the Klopp, but we'll start in with reflection. So he's got 4 elements going on there. The first being reflection, and in most of our cases we do it through reflective writing. Now, when you undertake that reflection, it leads you to a position of reasoning, where you can arrive at abstract concepts to explain the various things that are going on, coming up with new ideas, new ways of thinking. You then apply these new ideas and new ways of thinking and essentially experiment to validate your idea, which then leads to an experiencing. You actually do that activity and you have a real concrete experience. And it takes you back to the reflection and going, well, in that concrete experience, did I manage to engage the experiment to test the hypothesis that I had when I reflected on the last time? And this circle goes on. And this is a really useful cycle to build your reflection. So you're constantly using your reflective process to develop new ideas. You design the experiments, test it, reflect on your testing, reflect on your experience, design a new circle. Now, finally, I just want to quickly talk about the 3 different types of reflection. One is reflection, just basic reflection, thinking about and interpreting life experiences. So this is where you're just thinking about what's happened and trying to understand what it is that's happened. And we talk about critical reflection, the broad contemplation to question and examine knowledge for beliefs, knowledge, beliefs, and actions for change. This is where you're starting to contemplate the things that are put in front of you to see what holds water and what needs to be contested, and if contested, what needs to be what are the next steps to take post-contestation. And finally, we have reflective practice. This is where you use it's almost like a continuous use of reflective methods to ensure personal and professional growth. That's where you want to talk about a practice of reflection over a long period of time to make yourself a more effective both media and comp practitioner, but also hopefully citizen and human being. I'll end this lecture with a quote from Peter Drucker, who is a well-known educator and highly influential in the business world. And he talks about he was quite a fan of reflective practice. He this quote is from him, and I think it's a really good quote. Follow effective action with quiet reflection. From quiet reflection will come even more effective action. And I think that just sums up the point of why you would engage in reflective practice. Thank you.